to have you here, Robert. It's my first podcast. I was thinking about doing a podcast for such a long time. Not of the idea that I wanted a podcast where I said like, okay, I invite people and talk about different things, but just I felt the urge the moment I meet people or people I even know for a long time to sit with them, talk with them like till we have nothing to talk anymore, just like go through everything and then have the material so I can work myself through again. Because like very often it is like when I met you for the first time, you meet in a bar, you have like a 2 hour chat, and then you probably never talk about this thing again, or maybe you don't even meet again. So like my idea was to have a podcast where I can invite people which have interesting things to say and just ask them everything I want to know personally.
Yeah.
So thank you to be my guest. Thank you for coming over.
I'm happy to be here. It's such a beautiful location. It's very relaxing. I feel very relaxed.
I think like that's what I wanted when we got this place over here and thought about the Airbnb project, to have like a peaceful place. And it's definitely a peaceful place.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's get started with something which I thought was very interesting the moment I met you, that you started a foundation or an organization which was helping people out of human trafficking, or how was that? It was all about human trafficking, if I'm right now.
It was initially all about human trafficking. The way it started is in 2003, September of 2003, I read a National Geographic cover story called 21st Century Slavery. And, it was a bit of a revelation for me. I never knew that slavery existed in the modern day. I guess I had heard that term, but it didn't register for me.
Can you describe this a little bit more? What do you mean with modern day slavery?
So when you talk about traditional forms of slavery, the way that we think of slavery, at least in the United States, the way we think of slavery after the 16th century, transatlantic slave trade. That's what we think about, is people who originated from Africa that were traded into the New World and had chains and worked on plantations. These are the forms of slavery that we think about when we think of the word slavery. And this article talked about modern forms of slavery that included debt servitude, that included sex trafficking, that also included child slavery that still happens all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked a little bit about this before and yesterday especially, and when I maybe didn't think about only slavery like the way you described it, but I thought about like whatever these movies I've seen that the Mexican girls get brought over the border or from Eastern Europe or from Asia, but you mentioned even like it was a lot about like local slavery or local problems and abuse, no?
Yeah, the way that I used to perceive the issue of slavery was on a spectrum, that when we thought about the traditional form of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade and people being indentured servitude, that is one side of that spectrum. That's the far side. It's something we can all agree upon, that is slavery. But modern day slavery exists in a lot of different forms, and some forms that some people may not agree upon. I always thought before we can really address this issue of modern day slavery, and there are still millions of people around the world that are enslaved in ways that we would all agree upon, that is slavery. But there are some ways that are more nuanced. Is it servitude when a person makes $2 a day for a full day of labor? It may be legal in that place, and you may say, well, you know, it only costs them $2 a day to live, or it's, you know, they're living in poverty, and maybe $2 a day is a good thing.
Are there cases like this in your neighborhood in the US where you're working that people get $2 a day paid, or what was the issue exactly over there? Could you give an example, like the cases you were working on?
Yeah, in the United States, it's more about sex trafficking. When I talked about, I initially mentioned to you earlier today that when I first started to look at this issue, the United States saw this as a problem of people being trafficked across our borders. And the more I got to know the issue, and the better I got to know that legislation, which outlined the problem for us, the more I knew that that legislation was wrong, and that I mentioned to you a movie called Taken.
Yeah.
This was about a white guy whose daughter was kidnapped overseas, and he had a gun and he could kick ass, Liam Neeson, and he went over to Europe and he found his daughter and he killed a bunch of people at the same time.
Like he always does.
And it was a white knight. There's something called the white knight syndrome, where we expect strong white men to save the day. And this was built into a legislation, which was not only the legislation which guided our work in the United States, but it guided everyone's work all over the world. And I grew to understand that it was wrong. And it was wrong because it falsely portrayed the issue of modern day slavery, that modern day slavery...
And how to solve it.
And how to solve it. Yeah. We can't just rely on white knights to solve our problems. We've got to find ways to solve them ourselves and build it into the community.
Yeah, and that was very almost shocking for me was to see like that it's not that obvious as we would probably think about it, as I thought about it, that you said like there are a lot of cases where parents sell their kids in the same neighborhood or community, and so like it's nothing that maybe the kids can go to their parents and say there's a problem, or because it's their own parents which are the problem. So like did you work with a lot of victims after they grew up, or how was it? Or did you get to know like kids which got found and taken away of situations like this, or how was that?
Yeah, you know, I work with some people that had grown up and wanted to be advocates, wanted to make sure that this didn't happen to other people, and they were abused in terrible ways. The ones who survived and became advocates had to really struggle to come through, and they didn't all come through. They still struggled. I think generally they all still struggled, even as adults, with what had happened to them as children. And I heard about some terrible things. We had something called the Truth Panel, and I started this as a way to have survivors of human trafficking talk in public about their experiences. And we called it the Truth Panel because it was named after Sojourner Truth, who was born into slavery. She escaped slavery, and she changed her name, and she decided to go around the United States to talk about how unjust servitude was. She was a powerful woman. And so I would talk to these people to invite them to join the panel, and I was hoping that I could find them speaking gigs that would pay them to go out there. And so we accomplished two things at the same time. They've got some income, and we're getting their voices out there in the public. And I would, once I invited them to join the panel, I would hear their stories. And, you know, yes, they were different in a lot of ways, but they followed patterns. And I think perpetrators work from a similar playbook.
Yeah. I think it's a good point we can talk about later a bit as well, because we're going to talk about other different risks. We mentioned it yesterday. What was your kind of job, or what was the thing you wanted to achieve with it? You wanted like to bring the word out so it wouldn't happen again, or it would be people get more sensitive about it, or like directly talk with the victims and get them maybe therapy with the traumas they had, or like, well, or did you have different ways on the same time approaching that?
So the way that I developed the strategies for the organization, the way that I saw things, and initially the field of anti-trafficking was all about victim services and intervening, trying to help victims. It is very sexy, it was very sexy, it still is very sexy for a tough guy, again, that white knight, to go to Thailand, for instance, kick down some doors and rescue victims of human trafficking, of sex trafficking. That's very sexy, and that brings in dollars. That brings in funding for your organization. But I thought that was wrong, and I mean, it's not wrong for someone to go kick down a door and rescue someone, but it's not helping to alleviate the issue. What I thought could alleviate the issue is if we go back to the beginning and try to reach young people before they're hurt. And I saw human trafficking prevention education as being the key to all of this. And so we began developing different models for human trafficking prevention education in schools. Even as young as 10, 12 years old, you can teach young people, sometimes in symbolic ways, or alluding to some things that they'll understand, some things to watch out for, and what these types of things mean or should mean. And this direction is not only the direction that we continued, and I think that we led in the United States, but it began to be the policy of U.S. legislation. And I believe now, if you take a general look at the anti-trafficking field, it's more about prevention than it is about intervention.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Like, is there any material like from that kind of teaching you still have, people can look it up for example, like, I think it's not only important for the US. I'm as the father of a 7-year-old girl. I have my thoughts on being scared about things as well. Like, maybe there are some talks parents never had with their kids, and they should maybe have them over the time of the years in the special age. Is there some material or some information out there you can get?
Yeah. I have to get back to you. I blocked some of this off because my leaving wasn't under the greatest terms. There is some information out there, but I have to get back to you on that one. With our organization, we collaborated with 2 other organizations to do the legwork of developing these programs and expanding them, and they did a great job. And then, our organization began to basically advise on a higher level for those programs. And then we began to focus on racism. We began to develop projects related to racism.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Like, when I get the material from you, I'll definitely link it to the podcast. I think it's something I haven't even thought about before the podcast, but just like coming up, I think it's something I would be really interesting to read, because it's something you usually probably not do. You sit down with your daughter or your kids and say, like, let's talk about human trafficking, or let's talk about whatever. Yeah, but And this is probably not the way to do it, but like there's probably some strategies and ideas how to get the word out to them. So like if something is coming up, they are alarmed. You know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the other thing we mentioned so far already a few times is trauma. People who like have been affected for all their life out of all the situation. You have a new project, the Psychedelic blog.com.
Yeah.
Have you had in this time already ideas, or did you see something or do something trauma related and psychedelics in connection when you're working with the foundation, or is it something you start getting into afterwards?
Psychedelics was a new aspect of all of this. After leaving the organization, which was about 2 years ago, I wanted to figure out what to do. I wanted to do something different, and I didn't know what it was. I was sitting around with a couple of friends in Bogota, the spring of 2022, and the question came up that what was your best mind-altering experience? And I had an answer. My best mind-altering experience was in my 20s after taking mushrooms. And I felt the next day, because what that did to me was it made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me emote. And the next day I felt as though I had gotten all of that out, and I felt as though I had taken an internal shower. And I thought to myself, I vowed to myself, I'm going to do this every 6 months. And I didn't, you know. I thought everyone should do it every 6 months. And I didn't. And when I went back to the States, I was still thinking about this, and I began to research the things that are happening with psychedelics through clinical research these days. And a lot is going on, and what they talk about is a psychedelic renaissance, or a revolution in psychiatry. And so I thought about trauma and mental health. And when I was in Colombia, I'd been studying the history of Colombia, especially the last 60 years, which have been defined by armed conflict.
Why did you come originally to Colombia, or why did you come back to Colombia? How was your connection to the country?
My connection to the country is in the end of the 90s. I believe in 1999 I began to date one of Colombia's national treasures, and I came back with her.
National treasures in what way?
She's a big celebrity.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to reveal the name, or you want to keep it secret?
I
think you're going to keep it secret.
Well, her name is Amparo Grisales. She's probably the most famous woman, the most famous actress in Colombia. But this was 20 years ago when we dated. But I came, and I visited Cartagena, Bogota, and so she was always my connection to Colombia. But when I came, you know, Colombia is such a beautiful country. It's got such beautiful people, and I sort of have a marketing mentality. I've always been a marketing person. Prior to founding the nonprofit, I had a travel company, marketing company. And so I thought that this idea that Colombia, or this fact that Colombia had been basically embroiled in armed conflict for 60 years, it made it a unique place in the world. And I also knew that there was a new president coming in who was going to change the dynamic of conflict in Colombia, and he was looking for total peace. And that's a train that I wanted to be on. And so I began to really research these clinical trials that were happening with MDMA, with psilocybin, with LSD, and another substance, ayahuasca, that's found in indigenous areas of Colombia and Peru and other countries. And I thought, if I'm going to study this, I might as well write about it, because I like writing. So that's what I decided to do, is create the Psychedelic blog, which the goal is to share this learning that I'm doing with my readers. And if I can one day monetize this website, to use proceeds from the website to help expand mental health care in Colombia.
Okay. And is it like a way of the idea you want to give something back to Colombia, or you have so much love for Colombia? What's the way, or Colombia is an interesting field for you for the study, or what's the thing about Colombia for you?
You know, it just seems like that's what should be done. Yeah, I mean, Colombia is
an excuse to be over here because you like it so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, that too. Yeah, I'm trying to do all things at the same time. So living in the United States and working a 9-to-5 job seemed like a bad option. Living here, enjoying my life, hanging out with people like you in places like this, and doing good work, I think, is the best of all ideas, and I'm someone who's on his third career, so I wanted to make sure that it's good. And you know, conflict equates to trauma, whether that's conflict through war, whether that is people who have been sexually abused during conflict, people who are suffering depression, suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. So I thought that Colombia must be one of the most traumatized countries in the world, and that they must need this new solution of psychedelics. And it's not necessarily a new solution around here in indigenous communities who have utilized ayahuasca or yahe in ways to treat as a remedy for things that are wrong.
Yeah, like that's like, I had a very interesting conversation with my cousin a few months ago, who's been very down in Macoa, for example, in that region, where a lot of ayahuasca medicine is used almost on a weekly basis in some communities, in some cities even, yes. And how they have been affected very, very strong by the armed conflict of the last, you call it 60 years, I don't know how many years it was exactly in that area, mm-hmm. Yes. And how interesting they dealt with it. Yeah, because a lot of families had victims, or most of them, or all of them. And I think Colombia is not only a place who could need a lot of trauma prevention or trauma work, but there's already a lot of trauma work done naturally by the cultural way to deal with it, especially in certain areas. So I think if you want to dig into this, there are a lot of studies which can be done probably, or people can be talked to, where you think like, oh, this village should be traumatized by all the drama and things, massacres happening over here, and you go there and you don't really see that because they found the way to deal with it. Some obviously not. I think there's always a cultural trauma and then a personal trauma, which are different things. Well, but I think the article I read from you, which is very, very impressive, with Jonathan Robertson, is that his name?
Yeah.
About MDMA. That's very interesting, and the way you write all this shows me that you put a lot of time and a lot of research in. It's not just like writing something down about a new area, so you really like investigation as well. I see you reading all the statistics and other books. And
yeah, I love it. I just at some point I need to make a living too. So maybe if I could get enough readers and I could monetize the website, I could pay myself too. But in the meantime, Yeah, I love learning about this stuff um, and better understanding how perhaps psychedelics can be another tool in the toolkit of psychiatrists and therapists that work with people who have depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. In the case of the article that you're mentioning, Jonathan Robinson is a therapist, and I found it really interesting that he does his therapy over Zoom. It's MDMA assisted therapy. So he finds a way for his patients to get a dosage of MDA, take it, and then get on a Zoom call with them for several hours. And he says that, this works.
Wow, that's impressive. Over Zoom. Does he only do Zoom calls, or does he do can you go there as well?
He still does some in person, but I think he's moved mostly to Zoom. And the reason why I find this fascinating is, for instance, in Colombia, I believe the number is 9.6 million people identify as victims of armed conflict. So that...
Do you know how this is defined? Like how the victims are defined in this?
No. I mean, there are different ways to define it. There are different categories that they list out, but it could be having been displaced. There are whole communities that were displaced by guerrilla groups and paramilitary groups and cartels. There is, it could be defined by rape. It could be defined by war trauma. So there are different ways to define.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you on this. I just was interested to see what this number actually means. But we can probably look it up. I think a lot of things after the podcast, I'm gonna look them up and maybe link them in, because it's something very interesting for myself, putting information out and learning for myself about real thing. But keep going. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I mean, the Museum of Memory in Medellin. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't been in there. I've seen a lot about it.
I mean, it's really deep, and they've got a lot of the information there. But what 9.6 million people equates to about 18% of the population. It has self-identified as a victim of armed conflict, and you got to believe that a lot of people haven't identified as a victim, at least not officially. So I think that a lot can be done. What I had decided to do, first of all, was try and bring one of the clinical trials that was happening in New York City to Medellin, and I wasn't successful because I was pitching that at the end of this year, or let me see, it was the summer of this year. And the local governments were going to change out in October. Yeah. And a new mayor will come into Medellin in January 1st. So they weren't ready to start a new project that was ambitious, and I don't blame them.
Yeah. Do you have the contacts over here in Medellin, or do they need help about it?
No, I definitely need help.
So I say, if someone listened to this and said, I think I could help you out on this, or even you said you want to create maybe a living on the thing, on the blog you're doing, on the website you're doing. So if someone has an idea and said well, as I told you before, it's awesome to read it, but I would rather listen to it or see it. Yeah. And if there's other options to do it, everyone can reach out to us, to me, to you, and say hey, I have an idea how I can help you. That's very cool what you're doing. I like your project, and I just want to get you some funds. So I want to help you out, and
that'd be great.
One of the projects, they can reach out. I think you could be way more active in social media. We talked about that, and I think podcasts like this are gonna help, and creating reels, or even bringing the blog into an audio format. There are a lot of ways nowadays with AI and new apps to do that. Back to the trauma project in Colombia, is what you want to do is more like events like this you just mentioned on bring something over to help Colombia as a culture to deal with this,
Yeah.
or you want to do focus more on personal experiences when maybe someone had, for example, I have a good friend of mine had a car accident years ago, and it's nothing. But she drives a car, like everything is great. But when she's in the car, especially driving with someone in the car, she always get the scary moments, like every minute, every 2 minutes. So like there's something she could probably work on it as well. Maybe with MDMA, maybe with Jonathan Robinson or some people like that. But it's a very different area to help people out with a personal thing. Like, do you think MDMA could help, for example, with this car accident thing?
Yeah, in fact, in that article with Jonathan Robinson, the way I sort of imagined, because I called the article "The Future of Talk Therapy."
Yeah, so like 2040, Eva is like opening up the pill and this thing. Yeah,
This imaginary therapist has gotten Alex, who had suffered from a bad car accident the year before, and he's unable to forget this, and it's plaguing him. So in the future, the idea would be is how do we work through trauma? And I'm thinking that Jonathan is on the right track by doing it remotely, because there are so many people that need help. The numbers are tiny as far as the world is concerned, who are receiving help. So the United Nations suggests that about 1 billion people worldwide suffer from some sort of, or living with mental illness. So how can you possibly, where would the resources come from to help that many people, or even a fraction of that many people? And I think it has to happen in ways that we're already used to doing, which is through phones and through video conferencing, and perhaps with MDMA.
And it has to be legal. Yeah. I mean, like that's next thing probably coming up. Before I forget, so like I can just reach out to Jonathan and book him, or like is he busy, or how's it going?
You can. And in fact, if you want to become a talk therapist yourself, you can go through his training.
Okay. Oh wow, cool. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna reach out to him. I already have some ideas.
So he believed that once MDMA, and by the way, about a week and a half ago, and I'm going to write about this in a blog in the next couple of weeks, a bill was passed, the defense bill, that it's this gigantic bill, $800 billion, something like that. It's almost $1 trillion now. The defense bill, where they pay for war, basically, and a lot of other things. There's a piece in there that talks about making psychedelics available, psychedelic-assisted therapy available to active military in the United States. So this is something that can happen now.
In what way? I mean, like to the military itself to treat.
Yeah, military therapists treating, military psychologists and psychiatrists treating active military with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that it's going to be done that way. I will, in all this podcast, especially with Joe Rogan, he mentions psychedelics like every time you can.
Yeah.
Heard a lot about it. But I think one thing, the moment it's not legal as well, is, me as a person, I have my own drug experiences with a lot of different substances. Yeah, it's like, let's say people would say like, oh, I heard about it, I really think that might help me. Where do I get MDMA? Maybe I know a guy who knows a guy who gets me something. Who do we know what it is? Who do we know it's going to help me, or it's going to bring me more trauma because it's not clean, or something mixed in it, or whatever? So like, I mean, like before therapy even starts, we need a good product, and we need it legally, because can you imagine, like you guys said, okay, I'm going to make 10 sessions and I'm going to buy it for 10 sessions, and someone catches me with it, and then I have another trauma in my life. Yeah? So I think like legalization as probably the step one before all this can happen. And when you said it's going to start maybe in 2024, that's awesome. And I think a lot of people and a lot of countries still look over to the US for a lot of reasons. Some areas less and less, some areas still. And I think it would be a good example just for other countries to say, okay, that's the way it can be dealt with. That's the first step into that direction. I really like this.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, that's the other thing I said, like, look, I would lead like whatever, an Instagram and everything following you. So I see the moment you post the new blog about that thing, when you said you're going to write about it, right. I want to have it just on my table. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, the biggest fear in taking MDMA, for instance, now that it's illegal in most places, is fentanyl. If MDMA is cut with fentanyl, which it sometimes is, and that can be deadly. So in a place, for instance, like Australia, psilocybin and MDMA are being used legally through prescription for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay. Oh, well, already over there it's legal?
Yeah.
Okay. And then it's probably, I think the other thing is how it's produced, what's the waste, because for example, when you see MDMA production in the Netherlands, then they're all like big areas and forest full of chemical waste and everything. I think there's so many things which could get better the moment it would be legalized in any way. I don't want to get deeper into that. There's like so many other, it's like a whole other new discussion, but I think it's interesting that it's a new thing which opening up. Like for me, knowing all that substance from parties in the last 15 years, and getting into all the new knowledge you start sharing and all this other therapeutical use and good use for it. Don't want to say that the parties haven't been good, but like the new way of using it and seeing it and accepting it. It's very interesting to see how many new possibilities come up, but as well like how many risks can come up with. So I think your microphone just went down a little bit. Yeah, perfect, thank you. Because you said before you feel like it's kind of a new movement or kind of new...
Some people describe this as a psychedelic renaissance or a revolution.
That's the word you used, a revolution. Yeah. I think with opportunities, there's always a risk coming up, people taking advantage of it financially. But like we talked about abuse before, I think psychedelics and abuse, there's a very high risk and possibility for predators to say, okay, let's bring people in my power and abuse them in any way. Like, have you thought about that as well already, or is it something?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this because if you think about it, a lot of people are playing out what this looks like if psychedelics are legalized in the United States or anywhere else in the world. What has to happen is that you need a lot of therapists. You need a lot of people in front of folks that want to utilize, because a lot of people are going to want to use them and try them out.
Yeah, not only for therapies. I mean, like just for fun.
Just for fun too, but for people that are living with mental illness, it's going to be part of a prescribed version of this is that someone is there in front of you. And in some of the protocols for these clinical trials, it's 2 people in front of you. And it's 3 sessions over a several week period. So I think, and again, this was something that we discussed in Jonathan's article, is that how can we do this in a way that's in a remote way? So if I'm, for instance, hiring, say we're
in a remote way because it's lowers the risk of abuse.
It lowers the risk of abuse, and as long as it works. But if psychedelics are going to become the thing that some people think they are, we may have to hire 100,000 new therapists
Yeah. What do you think is the downside of doing it over Zoom? Because, like, for example, I can well, maybe it's just MDMA, but like even with MDMA, well, you probably have to know a lot about the person before you start doing this. Maybe there's some other medication this person is taking, or maybe there's some other problems this person has having, or maybe it's comes into an anxiety attack, and it's like this person is alone by himself over there, and we're just in a Zoom call. Like, I think there are a lot of downsides with it as well, or is it not?
Yeah.
Or how's the risk to benefit in that?
So one of the things that's happening is that researchers are being very careful with the way that they're studying these substances. They want to make sure that if they go out, if this is legalized and they're going out to the public with prescriptions for these things, they want to make sure it's right, because it could blow up. Because there's so much enthusiasm, there's so many expectations that have been built around the psychedelic world.
And not only that, there's so many criticism and like so many people who are against it, and I think you don't want to blow it up in their face and they say like, that's exactly what we want you about, you know?
Exactly. So as someone who's taken MDMA a couple of times, a lot of these substances were party drugs. There are tens of thousands, what is today, Wednesday? There are tens of thousands of young people in the world who are going to take MDMA tonight on a Wednesday, and they're going to be fine. There are going to be there might be a couple that aren't fine. Something may happen to them. They may have a bad experience. But for the most part, these are pretty safe drugs. And I think it's possible to overthink it. I think that most of the people that, if we get into a world where we're doing remote therapy, where a person takes that, receives in the mail their prescription, and they take it beforehand, I think 99.9% of those people are going to be fine.
I think like especially when they follow the rules. I think that's another thing. Like if you go to a physical place and then you lay down in the bed, and then they hand it over to you, it's different than you get whatever box of 10 for 10 sessions, and you say like, yeah. But like in general, I'm personally not scared about that it's going to be not working out because of my personal experience with it. Especially with MDMA, but I think it's like, going back to the abuse, I'm 100% sure that a high quality experience, personalized experience, a lot of people would like to have someone they can talk to face still, and probably sometimes it's even needed. So, I think it's just interesting to talk about this, because I think like everywhere where people are, how you would say that, like altering their conscience, or like having like getting intoxicated in any way, if you can generalize like that way, if it's drinking alcohol, if it's taking drugs, whatever drugs mean, is a word, I don't really like it that way, but like there is abuse just even out of the situation, not even planned abuse, and so I think like there are a lot of ways which have been thought about how this could be done. Maybe like having more people in there, maybe it has to be recorded, or like, I don't know. But like there probably has to be, I think there even have to be an association probably. I think I mentioned this to you before. Mm-hmm. Someone who regulates it, someone who you can talk to if you feel like that your therapist didn't act the way he should have acted, or whatever. It's like,
I agree.
Yeah, so like I think, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it's a big responsibility to do it the right way. Maybe it's not even a bad idea to let the military do it first, and figure a way out which is probably very strict and waterproof, and then bring it out to the other people. Maybe it's not a bad thing. Hopefully they do it quick so a lot of people can get help.
Yeah, I assume that what's going to happen with the military treating veterans is, or treating active military, is that it is going to merge into the legalization of MDMA and psilocybin in 2024.
But probably in certain clinics or something like that, not in the pharmacy that you can buy it. Probably not.
Correct. Yeah, I think it'll be
Very, very strict
closely
use.
controlled
Yeah.
in the beginning at least.
Yeah, I think it even makes sense because probably, well, like you see after prohibition in the US, the first generation of drinkers, they had no idea how to deal with alcohol but illegally, and I think like a lot of new generations when new things going to be released, well, the first like 20 years probably is going to be very interesting, then it might be normal and good. So I think it's
Yeah, I think you're right.
it's like people in Germany and like me from the wine region. Well, we get drunk all the time, but like we have a very different approach to wine and alcohol in general than I see it with my friends coming from the US. When they are like having their first parties, and probably it's because they can't legally drink till they're 21. We can drink when we're 16, wine at least and beer. So I think it's the forbidden thing becoming legal. It's going to be an interesting way for sure.
It's going to be an interesting way for sure, but I think that the goal is to keep your eye on the ball, which is helping people that are living with mental illness. And I think as long as that line is followed, and you're absolutely correct, a lot of people are going to want to become psychonauts and they want to discover new realms within themselves, and that's perfectly fine. I want to discover new realms within myself too. But that's going to have to be a secondary concern to mental health.
Is there something done already? Let's say they're going to need it for 2024. Who's going to produce it? Is it be produced by the government, or the government buys it by certain companies who say like, or like probably some pharma companies who say like, well, we can synthesize that very easy. That's the way it's got to be done, because you don't have to grow it. It's not like legalizing weed. So now we need plantations. It's probably some labs and they just say like, we can do that, or how is that? Do you have any input on that part?
I don't know exactly who's going to be producing, but it's not a problem. Any drug company can get a contract, I assume.
They would probably love it, yeah.
But the way that I thought is that if we could bring this project to Colombia, we would have to allow Colombians to produce MDMA too.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I think, you're right. Bring it to Colombia, it's a whole other way. But I think Colombia is always very connected to the US in a lot of things. And for me as a German person, like when I came here first, like 12, 13 years ago, it was always like, why do they talk like this when they talk about Miami or Orlando, and like New York, LA? It's like they talk like heaven about it very often when you talk to the kids. Like, or even a lot of people talk about it like the place to be. Yeah. So there's a lot of admiration for the US, for sure. There's a lot of criticism, especially lately. But like, I think I'm pretty sure if it's a thing which works in the US, a lot of countries going to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, especially when there's a lot of money in it, and money to be made by the government or by some big companies, they probably say like, okay, it's a good thing and we can make some money and we can.
And once that happens, it'll be perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. Interesting. What else? Who else did you interview or write about? I only read the article from Jonathan. And the other, did you do it inspired by different people or by different substances? You said like, okay, the one was MDMA. Let's do another substance, or what is the blog about?
Yeah, just a couple of things that I've kind of reported on. I talked to a woman who wrote a book on MDMA. It was sort of everything on MDMA, which I found really fascinating, and I did a whole
What's
month.
her name?
Her name is Rachel Newer, and the book is I Feel Love.
Okay.
And
I'm gonna link it as well.
It was a great book, and Jonathan's book is Ecstasy as Medicine. And so I've also interviewed people like a guy named Matt Gutman, who is the chief national correspondent for ABC News in the US. And he's a great guy and has had such incredible experiences trying to combat panic attacks.
Okay.
And when I read his book, he was a friend of my friend Christian, who I introduced you to today. Christian's with ABC News.
Okay.
And,
yeah, he helped us with the setup in the lightning.
And he introduced me to Matt. And so Matt has just this incredible story. And when I read his book, I realized that I have panic attacks too, or at least I have in my life, that were momentarily debilitating. And so that I really found fascinating.
Did you hear the podcast? I think it was Joe Rogan as well, about the guy who said that like a huge part of panic attacks coming from fortified flour and fortified corn, because that means, because I always thought that fortified flour means that it's made stronger and better, but it basically means it's sprayed with folic acid, and like 40% of the world's population can't metabolize it, and then it basically is like cocaine, like it produces more thoughts than it can pull out of the thought, and then it brings out this kind of panic mode. I can't really reproduce what he said, but like I thought it's very interesting, because I have in my family like lately some cases, and panic attacks are like this. They tell you like we have usually no idea where it comes from. Sometimes it's because you're like whatever, every time you're in an elevator you get a panic attack. Okay, we can deal with this one. But sometimes you're just laying in your bed, you're just like walking around, and then it comes up. So I want to read this book as well.
Yeah, it's called No Time to Panic by Matt Gutman.
Okay.
But I've interviewed some really fascinating scientists. One who is working out of the University of Toronto on microdosing. I think microdosing about what? Microdosing psychedelics.
Okay.
They're studying specifically LSD and psilocybin. I think microdosing will become a very big part of. So when you talk about moving away from antidepressants, SSRIs, these big pharmaceutical companies depend on these drugs that people take every day. So when you start talking about psychedelics and a big trip that helps you get there to a place where maybe you don't need medication anymore, that does not fit into their financial plan.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that more and more microdosing, and microdosing is a way for people who are frightened by the idea of, losing themselves with a drug like that. Microdosing is a way of easing into perhaps a change of mind. So
I definitely can agree on this. I've done my own microdosing. I'm very sensitive. Mm-hmm. So like microdosing is not always microdosing for myself than for others, but I can definitely see how it works. And I think there are a lot of, it's a whole other subject. I think we can even make a podcast one day about microdosing, because like I have a lot of ideas what we can talk about this. But like before we go deeper into this, I think you just mentioned microdosing against, for example, depression, things like this.
Yeah.
Have you, with all the medication and drugs you can get against it, basically you get hooked on this forever. Like when you're in depression at the moment. So I know a lot of people have like, they get this pill and the other pill. I don't know all the names, and then they can only sleep with Xanax, or like if they're in a panic attack, they get Xanax in, then they basically start living on that, and then others, like friends living on benzos, and then it's getting worse and worse and worse. And then they said, I would rather live with a depression than with this addiction anymore. Like, is there a special substance, I don't know, in psychedelics therapies which is used to get off an addiction, or like is there some research done with this as well? I think I've heard like a lot about it, but like I can't name now any specific case or anything, or a person who's like doing research on that.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of research on psilocybin for addiction, and also ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca?
Yeah, they talk a lot about ayahuasca being used for addictions. There are a few different psychedelics. LSD, I would say. It was interesting in the United States, at least. Bill Wilson is an iconic hero who started Alcoholics Anonymous, and in the 50s, he was very interested in using LSD as part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was using it. And when anyone who knows Alcoholics Anonymous and knows people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's antithetical to what AA is, to think about using a psychedelic like LSD. So it's interesting that Bill Wilson was taken by LSD in the 50s and 60s, and he wanted it to be a part of AA.
That's probably what was shut down afterwards, probably after Nixon or whatever. And when you mentioned ayahuasca, is it ayahuasca itself, maybe even in Peru or Colombia and the Amazon, or is it DMT, or what is it, the research about?
It's ayahuasca. I don't know what kind of research they're doing on DMT specifically.
But it's done in Colombia, for example. Is there some studies done in Colombia about addiction and ayahuasca? Do you know someone?
There are studies that have been done on addiction and ayahuasca. I know a shaman or three who focus on addiction, whether it be smoking addiction, alcohol, drug addiction, food addictions. So the idea, it's not so much as take this and you'll be better. It's more of how can we find a balance in your life and fill that need that you were filling with food or alcohol or drugs.
I think I don't know, I'm not an addiction expert at all. I just felt like lately that I want to do a bit more research about it, because I made an Instagram poll about what's one of the biggest problems in my hospitality industry, the bar, restaurant, hotel industry. And addiction was like very, very up to the most or the biggest problems coming out of this poll. And I thought like about my life, I think my hardest addiction to get loose of was nicotine, cigarettes. Yeah, I'm very happy it didn't have an addictive personality to other substances. But like sometimes I think it's not even the personality. I think it's like the way I consumed it and the way what it was for me. Usually drugs have never been the thing which filled my emptiness. Yeah, I have very good friends, who say like, well, every time they're lonely, they'll sit down and drink.
Yeah.
I would rather sit down and work and don't think. Yeah, like that's what probably my way. Yeah. So like it never was this thing for me would help me out. It was always only the thing like to experiment or get adrenaline or get fun. But like maybe it's even that. So like it's very interesting to see first what is addiction. There's so many. Well, I got like as a kid, I thought addiction is you take once heroin and then you're addicted to that, and that's happened to everyone and always, and you cannot get away from that. But like, so like that's what I thought about addiction, and then I saw so many different ways of addiction, and I think it's very much connected to a deeper thing in myself and other people. What is the emptiness it fills, and you run again and again to it every time you get into the same cycle. So I would like to get to know that shamans whatever you mentioned, because I think after all these years in the industry, I'm at this point really on a point where I want to give things back to them, and not only knowledge about cocktails, knowledge about liquor, but more about how to live a sustainable life in the industry we love so much. Because it's not about saying, okay, this is an industry with a lot of toxic influence and how you get out of it now. damn no, like I love that industry. I love the bars. I love drinking. I love cocktails. Yeah,
The social
and like
aspect.
the people you meet, the love you share. There's something about everywhere I travel to, whatever. I go to Madrid. I go to Mexico. I've been to Asia, and they say like, oh, I have a friend who's a bartender over there. You should definitely meet him. So I go there. Say I'm a bartender. This person sends me. This person doesn't know me. I get the key. I get in this house. There's such a big trust in this industry. There's so much beauty in it, and yeah, I want to give something back about other parts, like how to live a sustainable life, a happy life in it. And I think ayahuasca is a very interesting subject. It changed my life, definitely. So, like, if there's some input studies and work done about addiction, I'm definitely interested in this.
Yeah. I mean, I went in my first ayahuasca experience wanting to end my addiction on Ambien, on sleeping pills. I've been taking these for years, and I know I shouldn't, but I'm just not able to. I take a very little bit, but I'm not able to get to the next step and take zero. It's physically addictive to
Just
me.
to understand, right? Like, your trouble with it is not that you feel like every 6 weeks you need to double the amount you
No.
have to take or whatever, and you see
No.
like, fuck, it's gonna kill me one day. It's more like the feeling of that you can't really be 100% without it, and that bothers you, and you want to get away from it.
Yes, definitely. Otherwise, I love it.
Yeah.
You know, it's great. If I need to go to sleep, I could take a pill and go to sleep and wake up feeling like $1 million.
And how was your approach to it? Like, did you say like, okay, you heard about that ayahuasca can help, and then
Yeah, I had researched a bit, and I stated up front that this is what I'd like to address tonight. And, I was, and I have only dipped my toe into ayahuasca. I haven't been like on a 7-day retreat. I mean,
Okay.
this was one night, twice for me. So I'm not a good judge of whether it works on addictions or not, but that just happens to be what my focus was the first time I went in.
I think very often we are so focusing on the problem itself and on the, how you call that, not on the cause but on the symptoms.
Yeah.
I think ayahuasca is like, especially in my life, not about addiction but about a lot of other things, showing me not only the symptoms are almost very often very clear, shows the cause and shows like the connection between a lot of things, or the disconnection to a lot of things. And I think that might be a way that ayahuasca can help with it. Yeah. Now it's just like talking back and forwards about it. I think we can do some research on that. Maybe we can back on another talk
Yeah.
about more self-experiments or more experience from a Taito shaman about it. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think we mentioned so many different things. I would rather go back a little bit. I know you're going to be not only in Medellin, you're going to be in Palomino for a bit, and then you're going to go to Peru for a little bit.
Yeah.
Is this all about the same research for the blog you're going to do, or what's your closer future going to look like? Because I know you have this interesting journey you're on, and what we can expect to come up in the next month?
I mean, for me, it's about spending more time in South America. So I can only be in Colombia per my visa for 180 days in a calendar year. So I'm going to flee to Peru for a month, and that'll give me another month in South America. I may go somewhere else for another month, maybe Ecuador. So that's the only reason, plus the fact that I don't know Lima very well. I've been there before, but I haven't explored, and I'm really anxious to do that.
Yeah, a lot of beautiful museums, very good food. You definitely have a month of a lot of nice experiences.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. But I love being here in Medellin and being with my friends, and I've made a lot of friends here, and I'm anxious to get started in the new year on trying to make things happen.
Yeah, I think like if you have like any subjects, any different special events or things you said like, okay, that's what I'm working on at the moment, or that's gonna come up next, you can let me know as well. We can keep sharing it.
Okay.
As well, like when you're in Peru, or ever like, if you don't want, I make your social media, you just send me the pictures and the text. I help put it up seriously, because I think you're gonna see so many interesting things, and you have so many interesting thoughts. And when I read your text, it's like, wow, like I see so many people reposting things, but like not that many people doing the research and writing about it the way you do. So I really want to bring that out, and I want to read it myself, and like being part of like helping to make this a good movement, because like if such a pure motivation behind it, yeah, it's such a zero selfish motivation, and I really like that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, there's not that much time to be selfish. I mean, I'm going to be dead in 20 years or 30 years, so might as well have fun in the meantime and see if maybe you can do something positive.
Yeah, I mean, like, but you said like it's something normal, but like there's some presidents out there and they're almost dead and they're still like wanting to be in power, a lot of things, yeah. So I think like
I think you can name some people like that.
Yeah, so I think like it's not very natural. I think it's even very interesting that very often people should like focus on not selfish reasons and say like, okay, I'm gonna be gone maybe tomorrow, yeah. Like one of the most important politicians in the German history just died last night, yeah. And I just like have read about him. I thought like, okay, haven't heard about him for a while. He must be good, but now he's gone, you know. So yeah, I think it's very, very cool the way you think about it, the way you got motivated about it, and yeah, I wish you a lot of luck, a lot of success for this project. I hope I can be part of that way, helping you out a little bit, or just like seeing it from the far and have you back for another podcast in a bit and see like how everything went any further. Yeah, I think a lot of informations which came up in the podcast, we link everything to the podcast wherever we're going to post it. And if people have questions, I'm going to link all your information so they can reach out to you directly. I'm going to definitely reach out to Jonathan. I think he's a very cool guy and have interesting ideas, questions about him as well. And yeah, that's how it comes to an end. I think that was very, very beautiful.
I do too, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming over here to Guatapé, to this beautiful new project we're having over here. We didn't share anything about it, but I'm going to make a podcast over this for sure in the future. Everyone who's want to come to Medellin, Guatapé, can write me as well if you need anything. Be welcome, be my guest. I always like to meet new people. And talking about that, especially last week, like a lot of people said, oh, you're going to make a podcast. What are you going to talking about? I thought I'm just going to go with the flow. I never thought it's going to be about psychedelics, for example. It's just like it's something I'm interested at the moment in. But like I see, like a few friends struggling getting off of benzos. And I think if someone, I know that Jordan Peterson had his process getting off there. I didn't really dig into this. But if someone has an idea what's a good way to do it, or what's the way it works, they can reach out to me. It's a subject I really want to talk about as well. I'm personally interested in helping out friends who are very close to myself. And I think maybe we can even build a bridge with other people to say, okay, microdosing LSD, whatever, and what studies and experiments are done and which therapies are working. And yeah, I'm very interested in the subject.
Cool. So am I.
Well, it's coming to an end. I'm flying to Cartagena tonight. We're going to have another talk probably on our way back.
Yeah.
And cool. Thanks for coming again.
Thank you.
All the luck, all the best, and be blessed.
Thanks. We'll stay in touch.
Yes.
All right, my friend.